Hello, everybody. My name's Michelle, and I'm here to give you a very brief introduction to the big topic of unconscious bias. It's something that we all have. Now, before I go into that, I want to share a picture with you, and I'd like you to tell me what you can see in this picture. So I'll just give you a few moments to look and see what you can see here. Now, what most people say they can see, and they're pretty adamant about it, is that they can see a Dalmatian. So if you can't see where what I'm referring to, I've shown a red outline on the right-hand side here. This is where people swear they can see an outline of a Dalmatian dog. Now, because so many people say they can see it, they're pretty upset when I tell them that this is just a white background with some black splodges on them. There isn't actually a picture of a Dalmatian dog in there. So given that the dog isn't there, why do so many people insist that they can see it? Well, the reason is that research suggests that we take in about 11 million bits of information every day, but we can only consciously process about 40. Now, given that we are constantly taking in millions and millions of bits of information, how could we possibly focus on all of this? We need some kind of filtering process. So what our brain does is only consciously focuses on what is new or what is important, and our unconscious mind very quickly, very rapidly takes care of the rest and makes certain assumptions or rules to work by. So for example, you don't normally consciously think about how to open a door. If your brain's seen one door before, then we pretty much know how to work through all of them. We focus our attention on other things. So we have lots of unwritten rules or assumptions that our unconscious mind makes quicker than our conscious mind can process to help us navigate our way through the world without having to process all this information. Now, you're looking at this picture here and you might think, well, that picture's pretty ambiguous. Surely we don't make those same kind of assumptions when we have objective data. Well, I've got another problem for you here. Have a look at this problem and tell me intuitively what you think the answer is. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to come up with your answer to this problem. If a baseball and a bat cost £1 10p together and the bat costs £1 more than the ball, how much does the ball cost? Now, no calculators, just intuitively, the first answer off the top of your head. So, what is the answer? Did you say £1? Well, congratulations if you didn't, because most people give the answer £1 when answering this question. Now, intuitively, that seems to be the obvious answer that people give. And although it's true that £1 and 10p does equal £1 10p, if you take £1 and minus 10p, you get 90p. But the problem we asked for was that we needed the ball to cost £1 more. The bat to cost £1 more than the ball. So the ball must cost 5p and the bat must cost £1 5p. So why do people do this? As I say, £1, it seems to be an intuitive answer, but it's not until they sit down and consciously calculate it that they realise that the answer is not quite what they thought. Now, these assumptions that we make normally work for us, and most of the time this is a good thing. But as you can see from the bat and ball problem, it does sometimes cause us a bit of a problem when our unconscious mind gives us an answer or a decision or a judgment without us consciously taking time to think about whether that is correct. Now, implicit or unconscious bias happens by our brains making incredibly quick judgment and assessments of people and situations without us realising. Our biases are influenced by our background, cultural environment, and personal experiences. We may not even be aware of these views and opinions or be aware of their full impact and implication on others. Your background, your personal experiences, your societal stereotypes and cultural context can have a huge impact on your decision making and actions without you realising. So we're not aware of these unconscious decisions that we're making. When you're talking about a Dalmatian picture or a bat and a ball, it's probably not too much of a problem, but it can cause us huge problems in the workplace. Now have a look at some of these pictures here. Can you spot anything potentially problematic with these adverts? Now, all of these are adverts that have been published, I'm sad to say, fairly recently. And as you may have spotted, they do tend to play to certain biases. So the Notting Hill one, the suggestion there would seem to be that some people in Notting Hill were born to dance, but the association there is that it's the white male that it gets down to the business of actually selling flats. Again, the Co-op one, we can see there's assumption there that it's your daughter going to be doing the washing up. And the suggestion with a big one seems to think, well, there's so much problematic with that, I don't really know where to start. But I think the think like a man bit is probably the thing that caused the most upset when this ad was published. Now, these adverts in isolation are not going to cause a problem in themselves. They're not going to cause discrimination against people. But what they do is show biases that we have, and they reinforce them. Whenever we make an association between one thing and another, a connection fires off in our brain. The more that these associations are made and reinforced, the quicker that pathway in the brain happens. So the quicker and easier that assumption becomes. So if you see, traditionally we see women in soap powder adverts, we make an association between women and being at home. Quite often we assume that it's women doing the domestic chores within a household. We don't tend to challenge it. That's just such a well reinforced image that we make the association very easily. We tend to think of management as being a man's domain. In fact, the top CEOs of most companies are white males as well, and we tend to think of people of different races potentially doing lower paid or clerical work. Now, the build-up of that can be quite damaging over time because we may unconsciously make these judgments or unconsciously make these associations, and unwittingly they may inform decisions that we make within our business lives and important decisions in our personal lives as well. And I'll give you an example of where this happened with one company. There was a genuine story of a business that had an occupational psychology company go in and study their team. And what they found was there was a team where the manager had 30 direct reports. Now, 20 of those direct reports were men and 10% were women. 10 of those were women. Now, that's a 2/3 bias of men to women in the team, but that's actually not unusual in the workplace for historical reasons. Now, the way the team was set up was each member of the team had direct access to the manager. They reported directly to him. What the company found was when they went in, though, that in practice it didn't quite work like that. It turned out the employees did not have equal access to the manager. With so many people to manage, it just without any sort of formal structure, informally, it just tended to be the case that the manager had an inner circle of people. These people had the manager's ear. If he wanted the message going out, these are the people that he'd speak to first, a decision to make. If he was getting information from the team, these are the people he tended to go to first and foremost. Now, what we find is that only one of the inner circle were actually a woman, and 9 of the inner circle were men. Every person on the outside, if they wanted to get to the manager and get their ideas across or be heard, had to go through one of these people. So rather than 10 women having a direct access or route to the manager, in fact, only 1 in 30 did. Now, why did the manager have an inner circle which mostly consisted of men? Because surely this wasn't good for his business. Surely this meant that he was constantly getting information or ideas or reinforcement from people who were just like him. Was that really going to challenge him or broaden his thinking enough? Well, there's a reason why it happened. And that reason is we tend to gravitate to people who are just like us. There was an experiment done, a psychological experiment completed, and what they did was they asked the subjects of the experiment to fill in some paperwork and hand it in at a reception desk. Now, little did the participants know that this in itself was the experiment. The participants would go up to the reception desk, hand in their papers. The receptionist would duck down behind the desk, staple the papers and hand them back again. What the subjects didn't realise was that the person who ducked down behind the desk to staple the papers was different from the person that popped up and handed the papers back. The experimenters swapped the person behind the desk and tried to do it without the participants noticing. Now, staggeringly, the participants didn't notice 80% of the time. Now, the experimenters were really shocked by this, and they started to get a bit playful with it and play around with which factors they could change. So they started changing hair colour, eye colour, height. Could we swap a tall person with a short person? Could we get the person to have a complete change of clothes to what the other person was wearing? Interestingly, they could swap any number of factors, and the people just didn't notice 80% of the time. However, there were two factors that they could not notice. One was gender. The experimenters couldn't swap the gender of the receptionist without the participants noticing. The other one was race. They couldn't change the skin colour of the person behind the counter without people noticing. So we can't not notice certain things about people. This is why we all have bias. Going back to caveman days, going very, very far back into our history, we wanted to scan the horizon and know who was like us, who was friend, who was foe, and who were the people that were most likely to have interest aligned to our own. For this reason, we do tend to spot when people are different from us, and we can't not notice that people are different. So it comes to identity, skin colour, to your gender, to certain things, we just cannot not see these things. So if you think back to the example of the manager, he probably wasn't consciously trying to exclude women from his inner circle. What is most likely to have happened is that he will have just gravitated towards people that were like him, perhaps people who reminded him of his younger self, or people who maybe just share the same interests with him on the social level. Now, what happens in this situation when we gravitate to people like us, particularly if we're in positions of responsibility, is that we tend to do a bit of informal coaching with people. Now, you might not think of this as coaching, but let's say this manager goes for coffee with one of the guys in his inner circle. They'll probably end up talking about work, about meetings. The manager might even start to talk about how he managed upwards and deals with more senior managers. He might start to talk about decisions he's making or opportunities coming up. He's not intentionally coaching that person, but that person is getting the benefit of his wisdom, the benefit of his knowledge, is getting insight that other people don't have. So when you're informally coaching people, albeit unwittingly, and you're tending to gravitate and do this coaching with people who are just like you, without even realizing, we can begin to exclude others, people who are different from us. So what can we do about this? If we all have bias, what do we do? Well, first of all, understand that we do all have biases. Be open to understanding what yours are. Observe yourself. Notice the first thought that comes into your head when you encounter someone different to yourself. Is that thought accurate? Is it fair? When you have a decision to make, take steps to make sure you're being objective. Are you always choosing the same people or making similar decisions? Maybe review decisions that you made in the past. Look around your social circle, your professional circles. Are you gravitating towards the same people? When you make decisions, is there other steps you can take to make sure you're being objective? Can you take identifying information off of CVs, for example, or appraise people's performance without actually seeing the identity of them? And finally, and this is a really good one, expose yourself to situations where you can mix with people different to you. Now, my mum did something very impressive. She started to notice that she was having uncharitable thoughts towards the elderly, and she did something really impressive that most people don't do. She decided to volunteer in a daycare centre for the elderly because she knew that the way that she was thinking was bad. And sure enough, when she started to volunteer with these people, she had a newfound respect for them, and it did challenge those assumptions that she'd been making. So proactively make sure you're working with groups who are different to you. Don't just stick to people who are similar. So there's 4 suggestions. There is one more. There is an implicit association test by Harvard University. It's a test whereby you're flashed up images on the screen and you're given words, and you have to very, very quickly, in a very time-pressured scenario, to make sure you're acting on impulse and answering intuitively with your unconscious mind, you are asked to click on various answers. Now, this test will help you identify your implicit biases or unconscious biases, and it's a great tool to use and really interesting if you ever want to give it a go. So there we go, 5 ways that you can combat your unconscious bias. We've had a look at what it is, look about why it's there, and more importantly, the impact it has on other people. My challenge to you is to think about your own biases and how we can overcome them.